And if you want to continue watching the BBC News at 10, please turn over to BBC One, or you can watch on iPlayer. Next, it's Newsnight.
The Iron Dome missile defence system over Tel Aviv tonight stops some of Tehran's missiles, but not all. Fears of a full-scale war as Israel says the attack on Iran is just the beginning. We ask, where will it end? Good evening, this is Matt Chorley with your Friday Newsnight, live from Broadcasting House across the UK and around the world on BBC News. Thanks for joining us wherever you are tonight. We're going to go straight to these live pictures from the town of Ramat Gan, just east of Tel Aviv. Israeli soldiers and first responders have been searching for survivors and assessing the damage to a building hit by an Iranian missile. Also tonight, we'll keep an eye on the Tel Aviv skyline. We're seeing a sharp escalation in the Israel versus Iran conflict. Very fast moving, especially over the past couple of hours. We're going to focus on where this is heading and the risks of an escalation. In the Newsnight studio, international journalist and broadcaster Gabriel Gatehouse. Evening, Gabriel. Nomi Bar Yaakov, a leading international lawyer and peace negotiator who is an associate fellow at the Geneva Centre for Security Policy. But first, military expert Mikey Kay joins us. Mikey, we've been seeing these pictures coming in. Explain what we're seeing of these missiles over Tel Aviv tonight.
Matt, what you're probably seeing is the inner part of the Iron Dome three-tiered layered defense system. Let me just set that out briefly for you. So out beyond 2,000 kilometers, you have interceptor missiles called Arrow 2 and 3. Arrow 2 basically intercepts missiles within the atmosphere. Arrow 3 has an interceptor capability beyond 2,000 kilometers that can actually reach on the verge of space. The middle system is called David's Sling. That's from 40 kilometers out to about 300 kilometers. That usually targets shorter range ballistic missiles. And then right at the very sort of close end of the spectrum, between 4 kilometers and 70 kilometers, you've got an interceptor missile called Tamir, which is a joint venture between Israel and the US, and that is made in Arkansas. But that's got a millimetric radar on it that basically allows it to decide whether the projectile is going to hit something which is either urban, in which case it'll intercept it, or it's got a guidance system that if it knows that the projectile is tracking somewhere rural, for example, then it'll leave it alone. And that's really important in terms of keeping the salvos up with the missiles. There's about 3 to 4 launchers per battery, and there's about 20 Tamir missiles for each launcher. So that's between 60 and 80, but they can be used quite rapidly when you've got, for example, 180 ballistic missiles, drones, and potentially cruise missiles coming towards you.
And is there a point at which it gets exhausted? Is it a limitless technology?
No, it's absolutely not. It's not like laser. And I think this was really interesting when we were covering on the security brief what Israel's response was going to be to the massive attack by Iran, ballistic missiles, drones, cruise missiles. That was back in October. There was this big conversation on what Israel's course of action was going to be. That's a military term called a COA. And the prediction is because the Iron Dome had come under so much attack over the recent months, the salvos do run out. They do need resupply. And at some point across the three-tiered system, they needed to have a breather, which is why you didn't see a response by the IDF for a couple of weeks until those salvos across the 3 tiers had been resupplied. And then the IDF were confident that if they'd responded and then Iran had responded back, the Iron Dome would be able to absorb whatever Iran's counter response was.
So yeah, take us then to the weapons that Israel are using, their effectiveness in the attacks on Iran.
So it was a 200 fast jet Israeli Defense Force airstrike attack, 5 waves. You're looking at predominantly 3 main aircraft. The preeminent one is the F-35 or the Lightning II, 5th generation fast jet. Why that's so capable is because it's got a stealth capability. And what that means is it gives it a low radar cross-section. RCS is what we call it in military parlance. That allows it to get closer to enemy air defense radar, which allows then a more effective attack on taking out a surface-to-air missile system, if you like. The F-35s will likely form part of what's called a SEAD package, suppression of enemy air defense. And then behind that, you've probably got F-15, F-16. What they're more likely to have is offensive strike, such as cruise missiles, deep long-range attack. So they don't have to get too close to the enrichment nuclear facilities. They can launch standoff. They can launch a cruise missile, which probably has a steel penetrator, which will allow it to sort of have some form of bunker buster capability. So you're talking about 5 waves, fast jets, different capabilities, all coming together to form a package, all with various roles in order to achieve the military objectives of the IDF.
And so just finally then, Mikey, given the scale of the attacks on both sides, we've talked about how it's not limitless in terms of the Israel's Iron Dome. It's not limitless in terms of the missiles that both sides have?
No, no, absolutely not. I mean, it all depends on the effectiveness of the capability. And this is why when military planners, when you go into something like an air package, you look at the type of missiles from suppression of enemy air defense that will take out Iranian surface-to-air missile batteries. They also come in a tiered layered defense component as well. You've got the S-300, which is a Russian-made anti-ballistic, anti-aircraft missile that goes out to about 200 kilometers. You've then got an inner or a middle tier and an inner tier, very similar to Iron Dome, not as capable, but certainly, things that the IDF or capability that the IDF will be planning on taking out in order to ameliorate the risk to the packages following up the F-15 and the F-16 that are looking to launch kind of the bunker buster attacks. But nothing is limitless, but that's where the skill of risk assessment and gauging the packages, intelligence assessments on whatever the target sets are, and understanding what the best line of attack is. These all factor into all of the planning.
Mike, I really appreciate you joining us. Mikey Kay giving us a good briefing on the weapons being used. Let's turn now to the geopolitics. Naomi, how big is this moment?
Huge, enormous. It's unprecedented. This is Israel was mulling over for many years, or Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, leading the effort, many different options of how and what to attack, and this was agreed already on Monday, and it was the largest scale in nature and scope of all the options that were on the table.
Gabriel, what's your reading of it? Put it into some historical context for us.
Well, I mean, there is no doubt that it's huge, right? As you say, Naomi, I think it's the biggest attack on Iran since the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. So, obviously, it's a big attack. I don't think, however, that anyone is suggesting that this has taken out Iran's nuclear program for good, which is obviously Israel's aim, or that it's going to immediately lead to any kind of fall of the regime, which is another aim of the Israelis and indeed of the Americans. So it's big, but I don't think we can say it's a game changer as yet.
Naomi, big but not big enough for the Israelis?
No, it's big and dangerous. I think I would focus on the danger, on the risk, because the big question is, A, how far will Iran go? Israel said this is just the beginning. Yeah, so Israel's going to continue to attack. Iran will continue to retaliate. the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei tweeted even in Hebrew today, with very, very, very strong words. And I think, once they're out and they're stating that they're going to retaliate in an unprecedented fashion and cause serious suffering, they will do it. Ramat Gan, which you mentioned at the outset, is where the stock exchange is. It's where many very wealthy. It's a residential area, and they said they will target residential areas. So then the question, of course, is how will they react? And the question is whether they will only attack Israel, because they view the US is complicit in this, even though the US didn't carry out the actual attack. Clearly, they had knowledge of it, prior knowledge to it. So, we're beginning. This is really just the beginning. Now, just as the show went on, the ballistic missile sort of launched from Yemen. So there are things going, it's really, really dangerous. And that's what I would sort of caution against. And of course, it all started because Donald Trump withdrew from the nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, during his first term.
Well, let's turn our focus then to Donald Trump's role in this. Earlier, before we came on air tonight, I spoke to Katie McFarlane, who was Deputy National Security Advisor in the first Trump administration. And I asked her where she thought this conflict was heading.
Well, I think a lot of that is up to Iran. President Trump has said he wants to negotiate with Iran. He came out today and said, go to the table while you can. We are where we are. I think we're in the middle of something. I'm not sure where this all ends, but the objective from the United States perspective is to get Iran to come to the negotiating table and agree to give up its nuclear weapons program and agree to inspections so we can trust but verify.
In his inauguration address, President Trump said, "My proudest legacy would be that of a peacemaker and unifier." I mean, tonight the world's not looking very peaceful, is it?
Hey, let this play out.
Okay.
I worked for President Reagan as well. And in the first couple of years of the Reagan administration, people said, oh, he's a cowboy, he's building up American defenses. And yet at the end of the Reagan administration, and within a few short years thereafter, the Soviet Union collapsed, communism was done, and the Soviet empire was finished. The United States won the Cold War without firing a shot. I think that with President Trump, always take him seriously, but you don't have to necessarily take him literally. And he has an idea of where he wants to go with this. And he'll get there, whether it's this way or that way or the other way, but he'll get there.
But in a situation which is so serious and tense, and there are so many players in it, don't they have to take him literally?
One of the things that I would say about President Trump is that he always reaches for the economic weapon first. So what his objective in the first Trump administration, when I was the Deputy National Security Advisor, was to have maximum pressure on Iran, but use the economic pressure in Iran. So, for example, have sanctions against Iran so it couldn't sell its oil overseas. Number two, the American energy policy brought the global price of oil from about $180 a barrel to about $50 a barrel because of our energy policies. Now, what did that do? It squeezed Iran. It got Iran to the point of almost bankruptcy. So we were seeing Iran cutting back money to Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis because they didn't have enough money to do it. So when I look at President Trump and he wants to be a peacemaker, I think he will be a peacemaker. He's not a naive man. He knows that peace doesn't just come from a couple of meetings. He's going to see it through. But one of the things he will, I believe, do is very much use the economic weapon against Iran and then encourage them to come to the negotiating table.
Like you said, you worked very closely with him. You've been in the room with him. Tell us about how his mind works and how he would be reacting tonight.
Well, the thing about him is that President Trump, he gets to things instinctively. He has the most incredible instincts I've ever seen. I mean, I can come up with a policy because I've read 100 articles about it. I've gone to 12 lectures. I've read 32 books. He just gets there. He gets to the instinct and he gets to the core of it. The other thing is that he is considered to be just a great negotiator. I'm a New Yorker, and I knew him before he was president. He's considered to be one of the great negotiators of all time. And so whether it was the Abraham Accords in the first Trump administration, or now when he's trying to negotiate with Iran, he's trying to negotiate with Russia, he's trying to renegotiate all of the American trade agreements, I think he will get there, but it doesn't happen overnight. It's
interesting because there's been commentary around his reaction this week and maybe a lack of consistency. On Thursday, he was warning a military operation against Iran would blow the negotiations. Today, he's threatening Iran with even more violence, saying it'll be even more brutal. How can that be true on Thursday?
Yeah, well, here's the thing.
different
He
now?
said about 2 months ago, President Trump said, I'm interested in negotiations with Iran, but they're not going to string me along. They're not going to string the world along. You know, process isn't progress. And so he said, I think I've got a date in my mind. There's an end time. We're going to give him so much time. And then he went and said, it's going to be 60 days. We're going to give Iran 60 days to seriously negotiate. And I think we're now at day, 61, 62, and Iran has not yet seriously negotiated.
Is there a risk here that actually this backfires, Israel's actions with the support of Donald Trump backfires, and that actually it encourages, triggers a process by which Iran get more nuclear weapons? Did they see that if you're in Iran, you'll think, well, this is why we need nuclear weapons? What do you think?
Well, except for the fact that Israel's done a pretty good job so far of taking out the Iranian enrichment facilities and their missile sites, so that if Iran, you know, President,
at this stage, we're not
sure where it's all going.
Yeah.
But the attack. I mean, if let's have the conversation about how would you and I be talking to each other if Iran did have nuclear weapons, right? It would ignite a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. It could potentially put nuclear weapons in the hands of terrorists. And so if Israel's taking these actions, and then President Trump said we always support Israel, is taking these actions to eliminate Iran's nuclear program. They have a choice. President Trump always says we could do this the easy way or we do this the hard way. The easy way is Iran comes to the table and gives up its nuclear weapons.
With hindsight, was it a mistake to tear up the deal that was done almost a decade ago now? That there was a deal, Iran was at the negotiating table, and the last, you know, you can argue with the last 10
months. We're talking about the flawed Iran nuclear deal?
But it was a deal. They were there at the table. It was a bad
deal, though. I mean, it was a deal that not only did not stop Iran's nuclear program, it just put the nuclear program on pause. It didn't stop Iran's support of terrorist groups, and it didn't stop Iran's missile program. You know, so Iran was on the
negotiating table.
They were at the negotiating table, and the United States gave them a bad, you know, from our perspective, a very bad deal. From Iran's perspective, it was a great deal because it allowed them to get nuclear weapons.
But 10 years on, are we in a better place than we were 10 years ago?
Well, I think, does Iran yet have nuclear weapons? Not yet. And that's because President Trump pulled out of that flawed Iranian nuclear deal.
Katie McFarland, really appreciate you joining us on Newsnight.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So, Naomi, Donald Trump is one of the greatest negotiators of all time. Do you agree?
Yes. No. He may be a very good real estate negotiator. I don't know. I can't comment on that. But the qualities you need for peace negotiations and real estate negotiations are very different. So making peace isn't transactional, and you really need to understand the nature and scope and look at every single detail in a holistic and rather empathetic fashion. So you need to put yourselves in the shoes of the other party and try and understand their narrative and their threat perception before you move on. And what President Trump has done is he's appointed another real estate mogul, Steve Witkoff, to be his special envoy for negotiations with Iran, for negotiations on Gaza, Israel-Gaza, and for negotiations on Russia-Ukraine. And this is a person who's had no knowledge whatsoever of the specifics or the geopolitics. I mean, he is a real estate man. So that is very tricky. And the agreement, I just want to bitterly disagree with Katie McFarland, because she said that he pulled out of the agreement, of a bad agreement. But where they were at when President Trump pulled out in 2018, had they stuck to it, we wouldn't be where we were today. It was not a bad agreement. No agreement is perfect. Yeah, but
they
started the enrichment thereafter, and now, of course, again, they will move to do things secretly.
Let me bring Gabriel in. What's been your reading of Donald Trump's public statements in the last few days?
There's only really one way to read it. He looks like he's reacting to events. I mean, it's clear he said that they were, given the nod beforehand, but it doesn't look to me from his statements on Thursday, where he was saying basically we don't want them to do this.
He's going to blow up.
Yeah, it's going to blow up the deal. We're close to a deal.
Yeah.
We want the talks. Well, he blows hot and cold, but this did not look to me like a man who had given Israel the nod to say, go ahead and do this. And I think, what we're seeing today, where he's saying, this is going to give us more leverage to bring them to the negotiating table, we'll get a better deal before we pummel them even harder, feels like he's trying to make the best out of an obviously contradictory bunch of statements that are out there for him. I mean, I think the bigger question here is why did Israel decide to do this now with all the risks that you mentioned, Naomi? I mean, I think the answer is they are settling accounts. They settled with Hezbollah very effectively. The Assad regime, their allies in Syria, has imploded. Hamas and Gaza is a quagmire, but the other big account to settle that they have, as you say, been wanting to settle for many, many years is Iran, and I think they feel like they're in a strong position now, US or no US.
And no US, and actually Israel more isolated on the world stage as a result of its actions in Gaza.
Absolutely.
What difference does that make compared to if you go back to the last deal, the last Iran nuclear deal, where the world was sort of, at least the West, was trying to move as one? What difference does it make to Israel's actions?
No, I think they moved as one. I think Israel was maybe the only country in the world that was against the deal, the JCPOA, the original deal. I think Israel moved now for a number of reasons, but I think they felt there was the surprise element. Of course, everyone was expecting them to move if the sixth round of Iranian-US direct talks scheduled for Sunday were to fail, then the expectation was that they would move, and they caught Iran by surprise, and that's why the damage was as severe as it was, and that's why Iran will retaliate even more severely, and that's why it's spiraling very, very quickly in that direction. But you'll see Iran trying to use, not trying, they will use all their proxies, so there'll be escalation everywhere.
But their proxies are much weaker.
They're much weaker
than they were
no,
6-9 months ago.
No, they are weaker, and that's what you were saying. They are trying. Israel is trying now to see. Well, they have seized an opportunity, but the question is, where will this go long term? And we don't know is the answer. No one has a crystal ball to know where it's going. We all know what the massive risks are. We also know that diplomacy will move in very quickly, coming from the Gulf states. I mean, the Gulf states have become the lead mediators in the region, not only Qatar, also on Iran, Oman, and on Ukraine and on Gaza, Saudi Arabia. So you've got the Gulf states taking over the role of, and Saudi Arabia and Iran have good relations. They had terrible relations for a very, 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 very long time, and they fought in Yemen, a war that was absolutely horrific. But they settled. And Saudi can speak to Iran, and Qatar can speak to Iran, and all the Gulf states can speak to Iran, and they will move into diplomacy, but Iran is going to this is going to escalate before diplomacy will hopefully prevail, but we don't really know.
Well, we'll see. Like you said, there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of unknowns.
We do know that this will escalate.
Naomi Baryakov and Gabriel Gatehouse, thanks so much for joining us this evening. Now, back here in the UK, this was supposed to be a big week for the government, finally telling us where they're spending the cash. Keir Starmer told his cabinet this was the end of the first phase of his premiership. Rachel Reeves told Labour MPs to get out and sell it. That was right before figures showing the economy shrank, the oil price spiked, and there's a big row coming on welfare cuts. Well, Miranda Green is a podcaster, pundit and deputy opinion editor at the Financial Times. And Graham Brady, Lord Brady, is a former chairman of the 1922 Committee of Conservative MPs and has charted his relationship with various letters through his letterbox in his book Kingmaker. Good to see you. Good to see you both. Miranda, it was only a couple of days ago. It was the big moment that we've been waiting for in domestic politics. Does it all get derailed again by what's happening on the global stage?
I don't know about derailed, but certainly as the government sort of narrowed down its 5 missions and those milestones it then came out with to the sort of 3 big priority areas that Rachel Reeves talked about on Wednesday in a spending review statement. One of them is defence and security. And I think actually this story that's unfolding about Iran and Israel just reinforces the sense that Labour took power at a time of increasing unpredictability. It's a dangerous world out there. Trump's demands on the other NATO nations to up spending on defence. This is only one of the challenges facing the government. I don't think their plans will be derailed by the international situation, but it's clearly very difficult if you're banking on economic growth for all this spending. If you've got the oil price shooting up, you've got inflationary threats again, it's going to make it more difficult for the Bank of England to reduce interest rates. All that will feed through to it being more difficult to make people feel better off come the election.
And Keir Starmer's role, excuse me, Keir Starmer's role in this international situation, Graham, he clearly tried to get very close to Donald Trump for UK-US trade, but has been distancing himself from America when it comes to criticising Israel's actions in Gaza. Is there a role for Britain to play, do you think?
Of course there's a role to play, but it's a much smaller role than the United States has, and we've known that for a very long time. But I think we've also got to be realistic and recognise that for Israel, a nuclear-armed Iran is seen as an existential threat. And this may cause turbulence now, but thinking of leaving things and having Iran with nuclear weapons in 2-3 years would be potentially a much more serious situation. So, I agree very much with what Miranda said about the salience of defence and security spending, and I think the spending review this week probably underplayed by quite a long way what needs to be done. So these are the real challenges that are going to face this government and probably the next 2 governments and more.
Miranda, Keir Starmer's off to Canada for the G7, where we will see Donald Trump and others. Is there a sense that those major economies, those major countries can come together and exert some influence on Donald Trump, do you think?
I think it's quite hard to see how influence on Donald Trump works in any rational pattern, to be honest. I think it's obviously very important now that the other countries in the broad Western alliance have great communication, do sort of work in concert to try and guide America on a rational path. But it's really hard to do. I mean, he is a very unpredictable leader, and he's the leader of the most powerful country in the world.
And as we've just been discussing, the degree of influence he has in Israel right now is up for debate.
I mean, I completely agreed with what Gabriel was saying. I thought it was notable that Trump was trying to sound on top of a situation that even he is perhaps not on top of. So it is quite dangerous. And I think, also for Starmer, of course, there have been slightly petty, I feel, accusations that he has enjoyed being abroad and being on the international stage too much. And that she should have been concentrating on domestic policy now more. I think it's going to be quite difficult for the government actually trying to work out what is Britain's visible place in the world. Why should Britons feel that this is our issue? That's always tricky, but when money's tight, trying to convince people we should be spending all this money on defence. I mean, I completely agree with Graham, it's extremely necessary. But when you've got a row brewing over welfare cuts, the public will see all these things as trade-offs. It's a really hard sell. It's a really hard sell.
Graham, I spoke to Ian Duncan-Smith on my 5 Live show this week, former Tory leader, and he came in as Tory leader just as the war on terror began, and he said, literally nobody wants to hear from the leader of the opposition when there's a big sort of global crisis, and we've got, count on 2 hands the number of global crises. How difficult is it for Kemi Badenoch, and is she playing what cards she does have well?
It's the worst job in politics. It's the most difficult job. Nobody's listening, nobody wants to hear, and you don't break through by being brilliant, you don't break through by hard work, you break through when there's the opportunity that comes, which is most of when people are sick of the other people.
Is she being brilliant?
I think she's good. I think she believes in things. She's got a real sense of conviction. I think that's what the party needs, it's what the country needs, and I think she'll get there, but it's a very difficult time.
If you were still looking after the letters, would you be expecting some letters to come in calling for a vote of confidence?
Maybe some, but one of the points in my book, giving those numbers of letters, was to make the point that actually when the media and others were speculating that things were getting very close to a confidence vote, they were usually very, very wrong. And actually
Surely not.
Actually, my former colleagues in the House of Commons were far more sensible and rational beings than they were usually given credit for.
Miranda?
I have to say, I think the whole country was sucked for so long into this crazy Tory psychodrama of the in-out letters to you, the challenges, so many changes of Prime Minister. It's quite a relief that we don't actually have to pay so much attention
it's a relief for
to
me
these
as well,
matters anymore.
But
and having Kemi Badenoch as a slight sort of noises off is possibly just where we are with politics.
But people can ring Kingmaker and understand it.
Thank you very much. You've got your plug in. Right, let's take a look at the papers then. Tomorrow, one story dominates again on the front of the Mail. All-out war. Iran launches ballistic missiles at Tel Aviv in revenge for Israeli blitz. On the front of The Guardian, Iran vows revenge. The Daily Telegraph, Iran strikes back at Israel. And on the front of the Mirror, we will strike back harder. Netanyahu vows more to come after the revenge blitz hits Tel Aviv. That's all we've got time for. Another busy night of live news. Don't forget you can catch me on my 5 Live show every weekday at 2, live from Westminster. Victoria's back on Monday. Until then, have a good weekend. I'll see you next week. Good night.